within the European Union. The digital landscape has become a fertile ground for extremists and criminal groups to target minors and propagate radical ideologies by exploiting children's vulnerabilities, social isolation, discrimination, bullying, mental health issues are just to mention a few children's vulnerabilities exploited by terrorists and criminals who offer a sense of community and protection while leading to deeper indoctrination. Our hope is that this hearing provides us with an overview of the main strategic elements to combat the online radicalization, including the role of Europol, social media and messaging services, as well as with an overview on the preventive measures has been taken or to be taken to reduce this phenomenon and to protect our minors and help them to safely navigate the web. So this first panel, I'm pleased to welcome the guests intervening who will present the EU perspective on the topic, the work that is done and the plans ahead. So I welcome the speakers for this session, Mrs. Yolanda Gallego-Casilda Grau, Head of Unit of Prevention of Radicalization at DG Home, Mr. Piergiulio Pedretti, Head of the EU Internet Referral Unit at Europol, and Mrs. Bàrbara Molas, EU Knowledge Hub on Preventing Radicalization. So first we will listen to Mrs. Yolanda Gallego-Casilda Grau. The floor goes to her for a maximum of 5 minutes. We have quite a number of speakers, so we will have to be particularly careful in the time management. So Mrs. Gallego-Casilda Grau, welcome. Thanks for coming. The floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the invitation to this hearing on this very important topic. I will try to summarize a bit the initiatives at European level by the European Commission to address this important challenge of online radicalization of minors. To confirm that some Europol reports point to the increasing number of youth, of minor people involved in violent extremism and terrorism. We see main trends here that they are increasingly being targeted approach online with social networks, digital tools. Also that they saw an increasing willingness to commit violent attacks, to make use of violence, and also that the motivations are not so much longer based on the ideology, but it's more complex. We also see a growing and increasing online recruitment of minors as perpetrators of crimes, and here we see that criminal networks now target specifically vulnerable young people, pulling them into drugs distribution, committing terrorist attacks, violent acts, contract for killings, and this put these minors in a circle of violence and crime, which is very difficult to escape from. Criminal exploitation of young perpetrators has increasingly become a tactic used by criminal networks. They do that to avoid detection, prosecution, and punishment, and Europol has highlighted this in the last EU serious organized crime threat assessment. We have also to remember that minors are also victims that are targeted because precisely of their vulnerability by terrorists and criminals. So protecting minors from online harms is a priority for this Commission during this mandate. I will briefly mention some of the measures that have already been taken by the Commission and will be taken in the next months and years. The first one is the Protect EU, the European Internal Security Strategy. This was presented by the European Commission on the 1st of April. And here, the strategy to deal with this radicalization online, one of the principles on which it's based is a whole of society approach. To address online radicalization of children, we have to work, of course, with online platforms, member state practitioners, but also work in different areas, education, social inclusion, to promote digital literacy of the minors, but also the families, also in the area of social inclusion, employment. So we have to take measures in different fields. Also in this strategy, the Commission announced that it will be adopt dedicated guidelines on protection of minors under the Digital Services Act. We are working now on these guidelines. There is a public consultation ongoing, and the objective is to ensure that online platforms have in place a high level of privacy, safety and security for minors online. More broadly, the Commission will also present an action plan specifically on protection of children against crime. This is also announced on the Protect EU to address these different threats and risks of children being exposed to recruitment, radicalization, grooming, child sexual abuse, etc. So we are also working on that, and also on an agenda to counter and prevent violent extremism and terrorism, which will also include measures to address online radicalization. Legislation, we have the terrorist content online regulation, which is into application for 3 years already. This legal instrument is a powerful tool for member states to send removal orders of terrorist propaganda to online service providers. If they receive these removal orders, they have to remove the content within 1 hour. This is important because this prevents the dissemination of this very harmful material that can lead to radicalization of children. There have been more than 1,600 removal orders sent by member states to different types of platforms. The Commission is evaluating the implementation of the regulation, which will be presented next year. So this is important that all member states fully apply the regulation to address this terrorist content online. The Digital Services Act, of course, as you know, this is an horizontal instrument which obliges online platforms, big online platforms, to take risk mitigation measures when they are exposed to the dissemination of harmful content. And the Commission has opened proceedings against some platforms, particularly regarding the protection of minors online. We also work with online platforms in the EU Internet Forum, which is a voluntary platform. And this is important because we developed their guidelines, for instance, for online gaming platforms that are an important channel for online radicalization. A last word, and I will not be very detailed because I'm sure Bàrbara will mention, is the EU Knowledge Hub on Prevention of Radicalization. This is the main EU and Commission initiative to prevent radicalization. It was launched by the Commission last year, and here we bring together member states, practitioners working on prevention, and researchers, really to design interventions to prevent radicalization. So these are a bit, in a nutshell, the different initiatives that we have presented at European level, and happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mrs. Gallego. And now the floor goes to Mr. Pedretti, head of the EU Internet Referral Unit. Mr. Pedretti, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Honourable members of the committee, good morning, and thank you for the invitation to address this committee on the urgent and evolving issue of youth radicalization in the online space. As the head of the EU Internet Referral Unit at Europol, I would like to share with you the trends that we are currently observing, the challenges they present, and the critical role EU-wide regulation and coordinated response must play in addressing them. Let me begin by stating a stark truth. The role of minors in extremist and terrorist environment is growing. Through Europol-supported investigations, we have seen minors not only consuming radical propaganda, but acting as propagandists themselves, and in a worrying number of cases are perpetrators or plotters of terrorist attacks. Out of 452 suspects arrested in 2024, 133 aged between 12 and 20 years old, accounting for more than 29% of the total suspects arrested for terrorism-related offences. The vast majority of these young suspects were linked to jihadist terrorism, 114. These young perpetrators were predominantly male. The most of them underwent a process of self-radicalization online and were acting dissociated to any centralized organization, often alone or within small cells of peers. Several recent cases in EU member states have brought this reality into sharp focus. In Austria, Germany, the Netherlands, and France, minors have been apprehended for plotting or attempting attacks, often inspired by jihadist or violent right-wing ideologies. Some were as young as 13 or 14 years old. These children were radicalized not in mosques or schools or by peers in their physical environments, but entirely online. Their radicalization took place in a digital universe of encrypted channels, gaming platforms, and social media feeds, spaces where they encountered extremist content tailored for youth. The content was dynamic, interactive, and emotionally resonant. It promised identity, belonging, and purpose, often under the guise of heroism, justice, or revenge. Violent extremist groups understand their audience. They craft content using short-form videos, memes, and first-person shooter-style perspectives that mirror gaming culture. They insert ideological narratives into entertainment formats, using references familiar to young people, from anime to TikTok trends to video games aesthetics. This process leads to the normalization of violence, a gradual normalization of graphic content, the trivialization of suffering, and ultimately the presentation of violent action as not only acceptable, but aspirational. We refer to this as a gamification of propaganda, where ideological content is dressed in the format of a game or cinematic adventure to foster immersion and engagement. And make no mistake, this is not accidental, it is strategic. Through these tactics, violence is repackaged and as empowerment for children already struggling with isolation, marginalization, or psychological vulnerabilities. This appeal can be profoundly dangerous. Recruitment usually starts on mainstream platforms: Discord, Instagram, Roblox, YouTube, TikTok. From there, individuals are guided to encrypted apps like Telegram, Trima, or Session. Here, they are exposed to ideologically charged messaging, real-world conflict footage, and persuasive recruiters, some of whom use artificial intelligence to automate and personalize engagement. As Europol investigations have shown, minors are not only targets but tools. Some are recruited to spread propaganda, moderate extremist forums, or amplify disinformation. Others are groomed, psychologically manipulated into supporting or executing violent acts. The blurred lines between victimhood and agency in these cases create complex legal and social challenges. The threat landscape is also expanding beyond jihadist groups. Within the violent right-wing extremist milieu, we have observed similar dynamics. Minors are involved in the creation and leadership of online groups, some of which are deeply embedded in networks promoting nihilism, racial hatred, misogyny, and, in the extreme case, sadistic violence. A particularly disturbing trend is the emerging of satanic online communities known collectively as the 764 and No Lives Matter ecosystems. These communities actively encourage child abuse, self-harm, and even murder, targeting vulnerable youth as both victims and instruments of their ideology. These are not abstract threats. In the EU, we have seen real-world consequences: serious injuries, assaults, and homicides inspired or orchestrated in these online spaces. Many of these violent online groups have ideological connection with violent right-wing extremism, especially accelerationism. In both cases, jihadists and right-wing extremists, the Internet acts not only as a vehicle for propaganda, but as a radicalization incubator. This is where algorithm amplification plays a significant role. Social media engagement algorithms designed to maximize attention often push users forward more extreme contents by prioritizing material that provokes strong emotional reaction. Platforms unintentionally create echo chambers where radical views are normalized and reinforced. In such environment, alternatives perspectives are drawn out. Individuals are fed a constant stream of ideologically aligned content, creating a feedback loop that fosters isolation, polarization, and in vulnerable individuals, an openness to violent ideology. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pedretti, for your presentation. Now, I would like to give the floor to Mrs. Bàrbara Molas, the EU Knowledge Hub on Preventing Radicalization. Dr. Molas, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thanks for having me today here. In this presentation, I would like to focus on stressing the importance of tailored content in online radicalization amongst children. When we think of radicalization leading to extremist behavior, we often think of ideologies. By that, I mean structured, consistent, relatively easy to identify ideas that sustain an agenda, generally speaking. We are right to think along these lines, and Mr. Pedretti's intervention is proof of it. But this understanding is only part of the picture. In fact, today more and more we see what we call ideology mixers, and that is users who embrace different narratives in an inconsistent way, in a way that allows them to accept violence, but not to the fulfillment of a broader agenda or vision, but to respond to their own personal grievances or concerns. 764 and the No Lives Matter movement, also mentioned by Mr. Pedretti, are good examples of this, attracting children who are inconsistently prone to follow different ideas or narratives, and that, these range from accelerationism to Satanism and nihilism, as said, but they don't necessarily adhere to a common agenda. They don't have the same way to perpetrate violence, they don't have the same goals, and they don't have the same concerns, or they don't ask the same questions that other colleagues might be asking within the same network. It's very inconsistent. Children are vulnerable to this because for ideological fluidity to exist, customized content is key. And we see that younger generations, especially millennials and Gen Z, not only expect that from online experiences, but they demand it. They demand to have content that responds directly to their ideas, their questions, their needs. Authenticity can be to them more important than embracing a structured plan or vision or agenda, which is common in organized groups. Now, obviously, this makes a very difficult landscape for us to work on preventative strategies. First of all, the lack of structured beliefs makes identifying emerging threats very challenging, making potential offenders, who are also often not really affiliated with an organized group, less detectable. Perhaps while preventative efforts that address radicalization of children still seek or tend to seek categorizing harmful behavior on the basis of ideology, and we've talked about jihadism, we've talked about right-wing extremism, perhaps we should go a little bit beyond ideology when focusing on youth and focus on their personal drivers. What is that allows them to engage and choose different narratives that together create the environment for them to seek violence as a means of change? Learning from programs addressing forms of violence different from terrorism, for example, those including anti-gang and anti-hate threats, could be a new form of addressing these cases, especially if we focus on individual grievances. That'd be all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Molas. And now we start the round of political groups. There will be 1 minute and a half for each intervention, both in questions and in answer. Please indicate to whom of the speakers you address your question. We'll start with EPP, Mrs. Lena Dupont.
Well, thanks, Chair, and thanks to the panelists for their very brief but very clear intervention here. I think it was just enough to tease the debate in committee. Having in mind that there is a very good reason why we put the hearing up front of the LIBE committee, no need to further elaborate on that. I think everyone watching a few headlines just in the last weeks is very much aware of why we have it on the agenda. So allow me to really go straight to the questions, and they will be addressed basically to all of you to a certain extent. Starting probably with the last intervention on the blurring lines between the ideologies, let's say the fluidity of of ideologies here. What role for addictive algorithm do you see there as well? So what can we do there? A bit linked to the question of blurring lines. What could be, should be the response of criminal law, especially also when you look at the age, not knowing that it's not the only reasonable response, but it is indeed part of it. To Europol, speaking about, again, also the blurring lines, what kind of network analysis do we have of those groups? Where do we see them? With what kind of motives, and what can we learn from that? Do we need a TCO update? I mean, it's one of the most important tools we actually have, but is it still fit for purpose? And of course, probably also the latest question still addressed to Europol. DSA is also, although you are not officially part of the DSA to a certain extent, it has very much repercussions for you in terms of data that you actually receive. Do you have the necessary tools at hand to really work with the data that you receive in the time manner that is needed? Thanks.
Thank you, Mrs. Bon. We'll start by Mrs. Molas to start with the answer. Try to be as brief as possible.
Yes, thank you for the question. I'll focus on the first one on algorithms, if that's okay. As I understand, that was more directed to my presentation. Yes, of course, I mean, algorithms allow for echo chambers to exist, which allow for simplification of content, which facilitates customization of information, and that in itself, it's a problem. To me, the most challenging thing is that a lot of the behavior that we see online is not only blurry in terms of ideology, but it's also borderline in the sense that, legally we can't do anything about it. Sometimes it's just, it seems that some users would strategically use, for example, humor to circumvent terms of service. There's strategies that are constantly being improved by users. They learn from one another. They test the systems as well and regulation to see who can, escape sort of the flagging systems that we put in place. So it's always a little bit of a chasing game. I would say that one of the measures that perhaps we could try and boost is the amplification, which doesn't mean removing content, which can be an affront to human rights, but simply allowing to use the algorithms in a strategic way, in a way that it doesn't amplify content, but rather flags the content that might be particularly problematic and allows it to be constrained within a space.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Mrs. Gallego.
Yeah, perfect. I will refer to the TCO, need for a TCO update. As I mentioned, we are conducting an evaluation, which is required in the regulation. The Commission already adopted an implementation report last year in February, which said that the TCO has had a positive impact on addressing the dissemination of terrorist content online. It covered until end of 2020. But member states were already starting to send removal orders of content. And now we are conducting this evaluation also on the impact of fundamental rights, freedom of expression, on effectiveness, added value, coherence. So this will come next year, and then we'll see if there is a scope for possible revision. Also, I want to refer to the open proceedings under the Digital Services Act, that some of them are looking into this issue of algorithmic amplification on some platforms and what can be the impact on minor radicalization. So there are different tools. We need to see if they are updated and fit for the purpose.
Thank you, Mr. Gallego. Mr. Pedretti.
Thank you, Chair. Coming as a last, I will try to add some consideration, but already my colleagues expressed some of the most important comments. We agree there is an hybridization of the ideology. We saw glorification of other symbolism or messages from different ideology adopted by this youngster especially. This is especially a concern because, again, the most important driver factor for them is the violence as a normal act. The EU regulations are very pioneeristic, and I want to stress that Europol is fully committed to support, of course, the TCO, with our platform that we developed for facilitating the issuing of removal orders by the member states towards the online service providers. And the provisions of this regulation is very crucial. The fact that the company is obliged to remove this content is 1 hour time is very crucial because it's helping to limit the reach and the harm that the terrorist propaganda can provoke to these audiences. The Digital Services Act, although, as you mentioned, we are not fully supporting, we are supporting partially in the notification of imminent threat to life that we are receiving in a large number, and of course this is a priority for us because it's crucial to promptly address and identify the member state affected, but of course more resources will be needed. But again, the Digital Services Act make the online service providers, especially the very large platform, accountable and responsible for the algorithms enhancement that they have created that is pushing especially the young towards polarization, radicalization and violence.
Thank you, Mr. Pedretti. Now, S&D, Mr. López Aguilar, floor is yours, 1 minute and a half.
Thank you, Chair, and thank 3 panelists for bringing to this LIBE committee a matter which is of our concern. Actually, it's been on the rise. We have discussed it repeatedly because, yes, it's a fact. We're seeing in many member states an increasing number of recruitment of young perpetrators and minors to crime, and particularly to organized crime. And certainly digital techs, the access to digital services is the way to recruit them. So yes, there is a concern first about the so-called business model of the algorithms, which are leaning on violence, increasing numbers of youngsters. So the first consideration would be, it is to be, to the Commission particularly, is it to be expected some change as to the implementation of the pieces of legislation that we have put in place in order precisely to bring the digital service providers accountable for the business model and the algorithms, so that addictive algorithms will be held accountable when they have such a criminal impact on minors? The second thing is certainly that there is a correlation between perpetration and victimhood, which has been highlighted by Europol studies, that most of young perpetrators which are led to violence or crime are victims of abuse themselves. So is there anything that can be expected from the implementation of child protection and children's rights, so that better protecting children in every possible way, including digital literacy, education, social integration, would diminish this increasing phenomenon of minors being addicted to violence and crime? And the third question would go as to precisely the point of addressing specifically the variety of legislation that are in place in the member states as to the criminal responsibility of minors. The variety of criminal proceedings regarding underage is part of the problem. Would be there any chance for the European Union to add value as to these procedural guarantees to minors in a more homogeneous way in the foreseeable future? Thank you.
Mr. López Aguilar. Mrs. Gallego, I think that's you.
Yeah, thank you. On the first question on how to act and how to change probably legislation in place, I mentioned TCO, but the Digital Services Act, which is a relatively new piece of legislation, it had been into application since last year, only also foresees an evaluation. So we have to evaluate the Commission how it is functioning, and already by the end of this year there will be a partial evaluation of DSA of some of the provisions, including the interaction with TCO. But I think it's important that the Commission is using to the full extent the enforcement powers that are attributed to it in the DSA. And precisely the issues that have been mentioned, like the impact of algorithm amplification on the dissemination of this content, is already covered in DSA, including access to vetted researchers, and they are opening proceedings already against some platforms on this basis in relation also to protection of minors. So we have to fully, and the Commission, they are important. This is a powerful legislative tool, including fines up to 6% of the business global turnover of the company that can be enforced by the Commission if at the end of the proceedings is found that they are in breach of the regulations. So I think this is very important to fully use the possibilities. To deal with protecting minors in a more comprehensive way, including criminal protections, and all the aspects, because this requires a whole of society approach. As I mentioned, the Commission announced this action plan on protection of children against crime that the Commission is working on, covering really all the different dimensions, online, offline, and using all the frameworks that we have in place, including a future EU center for the prevention of child sexual abuse. So we want to put all the different strands of work together to address online and offline threats, including education, as what mentioned, digital literacy, critical thinking. So all our EU policies, how they can really be combined in an action plan to address the different aspects of the phenomenon.
Thank you, Mrs. Gallego. Mr. Busade, PFE.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Chair. Terrorists live among us. All Europeans are aware of that because we have decades of very high levels of terrorist threats. And it seems people are talking about this, this is something new, this is something that's just been created. But these terrorist networks has been spreading for years. There's over 300 people who have been arrested for jihadism over recent years in Spain. And now, so there's a huge amount. It's impossible to name all of the attacks that we see. Every week or every month we see a car running over some people. We see a machete attack on a police officer. But the question is, who is conducting these attacks? Now, I say this because I don't know if you have an evaluation of this in relation to responsibility for media. Often media hide the reality behind these attacks. Attacks are conducted by young people, and they then specify the origin of these young people. Now, with your analysis, we can understand that there's two different spheres of radicalisation: online and offline, in a school or in a madrasa, in a university or elsewhere. The most recent report from the French Ministry of Interior says that there is a dissemination of propaganda via a range of different networks. So you're saying these young people are being recruited, but by who? Why are we not identifying who they are being recruited by? Can we identify who they are being recruited by? I mean, you talk about satanic communities, you talk about jihadism, but there are people behind them. Are we able to identify who is actually responsible for this recruitment? And do you think member states are adopting the necessary criminal reforms required to address this?
Entiendo que su pregunta va dirigida fundamentalmente.
I understand that your question is specifically for Europol, but it could be for any of them. Yes, thank you.
We will start by Europol.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. You were referring to the different way to radicalize these individuals, online and offline. Now, more and more, we are using the terminology on life, because for the youngs, there is not so much difference anymore for what is online and what is offline. So this is an important aspect. Regarding the perpetrator, first of all, the propaganda is not directly addressed to the youngsters, but of course is spread in platforms where they are used to navigate, and is tailored in a way that is more captivating for the young individuals. So these short videos, these memes, this kind of games styles is of course more appealing for them. Regarding who is behind, there is several ongoing investigations that therefore I cannot enter into details, but especially for groups like 764, Lives Matter, Com Network in general, that is these satanistic, nihilistic groups. We have recently, both in Europe and in America, arrested some of the main players of these groups. So there is actions for not only focusing our attention on who is consuming this propaganda, who is plotting, but also who is behind the radicalizators, the core disseminators that are provoking this situation in Europe and elsewhere in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pedretti. Mrs. Molas, please be as brief as possible.
Yeah. Thanks for the the intervention, it was very on point. I agree. It's not new, but it is true that the level of unprecedented hybridization has been, that's something that we're dealing with that was not like this before COVID-19, especially when we think about the role of media and disinformation, which you brought up. COVID-19 was a turning point because it sort of spearheaded the lack of trust in traditional sources of information, which allow for disinformation and misinformation to flourish, and especially for younger generations to choose alternative ways of learning truth, quote unquote, to post-truth era. That's something that's really important in here to respond. And then the last point I wanted to make about like who is behind this. Well, that's the point, right? We were talking about non-affiliated individuals. Sometimes there's no organized group behind this. This is new too, because it's mostly the case for youngsters, excuse me. So that's the problem.
Thank you. Ms. Gallego, would you like to add anything? Okay. Then we move and give the floor to ECR. Mr. Weimers, floor is yours. 1 minute and a half, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Years of political mismanagement have brought much of Europe, including my own country, Sweden, to the brink. We're now seeing a rise in violent organized crime driven by migrant gangs, and children are being pulled into this nightmare. In Sweden, even kids under 12 are now being recruited to carry out bombings and contract killings. Just recently, a father of 3, no criminal record, was gunned down in his own living room by a 14-year-old with an illegal automatic weapon. His only crime? His oldest son refused a hit job for a migrant gang. So in retaliation, the gang ordered the murder of the father and his 2 youngest sons. The killers were recruited online. So as you have been saying, this is our new reality. The internet is used to hire child soldiers, assassins. So my question is this: what concrete actions have you seen being implemented around Europe as the most successful to block these criminals from using digital platforms to sell murder for hire services and recruit child soldiers? And especially Europol, I want to direct that question to.
Thank you, Mr. Weimers. Mr. Pedretti.
Thank you. It's true. This is a very important topic and is a priority for Europol. Recently was established a dedicated task force, interdepartmental, because this crime as a service, as is named, is hiring more and more young individuals to commit crimes, but is not only focused on the serious organized crime, it could have also implication with child sexual abuse, with illegal immigration, and potentially also with terrorist cases like we have seen in Sweden and Denmark this year. So there is a dedicated task force that has been established in Europol for working with the member states to support their investigation, and I can assure you there is multiple investigation and a strong attention to try to support Sweden and the other countries affected by this phenomena in the best way possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Pedretti. Now, I haven't got any speaker from Renew Group on my list. If it is not the case, then we move to Group of the Greens. Mrs. Brigmont.
Merci, je vais m'exprimer en français.
Thank you. I'll speak French. Thank you for your presentations, which set out a very concerning landscape. What we need to do is have, obviously, awareness raising at a European level for parents, for teachers, everyone who has contact with young people and people who are not aware of these phenomena. Above all, we need to look at all approaches and the fact these aren't linked to specific groups. This is perhaps the new point, as you've highlighted. Now, I'd be keen to hear your opinion on what's the real urgent point given the situation. Ms. Molas, you said it's extremely complicated to set up a prevention given the progression of the landscape. Nevertheless, is there not a pattern which is repeating in terms of profiles of young people who are susceptible to being radicalized. For example, feeling isolated, being a perception of discrimination, and then could we focus our social policy for these people? What recommendations would you have in relation to prevention, and what do you expect from European legislators in this area? Obviously, there's a huge amount of work to be done systemically at the EU level. And thirdly, jihadist groups, far-right groups, and perhaps this is a question for Europol and also the Commission. We talk about we would never collaborate with the jihadist group on a political group, but that we have representatives of the far right here. That is something that has happened, and this is people work them. So there is no firewall. There's no firewall around far right. Should we not set one up again? Because that is obviously going to contribute to the fight against the normalization of far right ideologies. Thank you very much.
Merci, Madame Brigmont. Madame Molas.
Yeah, merci beaucoup. Thanks for the question. Yes, we see a pattern, but it's very difficult to speak of profiles because a lot of the children that engage in these types of narratives never act on them. So then you cannot really allocate all of the resources to identify the vulnerable profile, because then, you know, chances are that perhaps 90% won't do anything about it. So that's something that, I mean, Europol can speak more about it than me. But one of the ways that I've suggested in the past that perhaps we could narrow down the problem is to focus on those narratives that we know tend to be most harmful. You know, sometimes right before a violent act happens, you see a stress in nihilism, for example. You know, society out there, the values they endorse is not our values. Values are useless. We need change. So accelerationism is something, a narrative that we see the threat of violence is a little higher. So if we tend to narrow down our focus on vulnerable individuals based on the narratives they endorse, then that we might have a chance to be a little bit more efficient. Otherwise, it's still very difficult.
Thank you, Ms. Gallego.
Yeah, very briefly on the importance of sensibilization, raising awareness. That's a very good point, and it was raised recently in discussions on preparing this agenda on countering violent extremism that I mentioned. This was a point, so really raising awareness of parents, of families, probably putting in place helplines because to report when there are early signs of radicalization of minors. So I think there is a scope to look into this on this raising awareness. And also no differentiation, of course, of the motivation, even now more in this context of blurring ideology. So where it comes from, these motivations of violent and extremist terrorists, we have to act, and we have to use the tools that we have, legislative and non-legislative, and outdated, and keep them updated as needed.
Mr. Pedretti, would you like to add anything to that? Yeah.
Just quickly, Mr. Chair, because I was addressed as well. So I want just to add, I don't want to enter inside of this political comment, just saying that, again, I stressed the importance of the algorithm engagements that is pushing this youth also in the right-wing area towards violence. We can add also the role played by the disinformation, the deliberate spread of false and distorted information to exploit social tensions. The social media are acting like a wind that are spreading these tensions in the society and creating polarization. And depolarization is causing violence and hate in our society.
Thank you, Mr. Pedretti. Now for the group of the left, Mr. Arbanitis. Yeah. 1 minute and a half.
Thank you very much. I'm going to speak in Greek. I think the statements that have been made are exceptional and widen our horizons in order to be able to get to deal with this, practically speaking. I have two comments as to whether we make the legislative framework more strict. That's one approach that we could take. For example, the criminal code could be made more minors in Europe. That these are this is done through orders being given, handed down. So we have to try to approach it either in a regulatory fashion or in a different way, that is looking at the algorithms and intervene in that way, and to try to reach all the different levels which might be involved in this phenomenon. In our countries, and Greece and other countries, there has been an under-evaluation of the public aspect of this, the public structures, the schools. And I think one of the important issues here is that we have to legislate somehow for social media. How can we do this? What do the speakers think about the way to deal with the minors, and what decisions do we have to take here? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Arbanitis. I think Mrs. Molas, you could start.
Thanks for the question. In terms of legislative measures, I mean, I'm not an expert on legislative frameworks, but I would say it's very difficult to put or to hold private companies accountable. I think there's been many attempts to have them at the table and participate of what is that we can do about it. But at the end of the day, these are for-profit companies that are interested in the clicks as much as anything else. And usually violent and, let's say violent content on its own tends to attract a lot of attention online, which means more revenue for them. So I really don't have an answer to this. Perhaps someone more familiar with the legislative framework can answer this.
Mrs. Gallego.
Yeah, no, I come back again to the Digital Services Act, which I think is an important tool that can be and is being implemented, and that's why we have to, and the Commission is exercising its powers on these proceedings, which also cover algorithm amplifications on harmful content. These proceedings are ongoing, and then there is a margin for maneuver to see if we have to add more. It's very important also to take into account the respect of the freedom of expression, freedom of information, so there is a balance there to make. So these open proceedings have to be really based on solid evidence that can stand in court. Definitely the platforms have a social responsibility to prevent that their services are abused to commit illegal acts, to express harmful content, and that's also a role for the co-legislator to ensure that if there is additional legislation needed to ensure that these legal tools are made. But not only legal frameworks, also this voluntary cooperation is important, and we, as I mentioned, the EU Internet Forum engaged with platforms, with member states, with Europol on this self-regulation, which is not easy, but there have been some deliverables of the EU Internet Forum in terms of guidance. There are code of conduct that are voluntary, but some platforms are signing up and implementing. So it's I think there are several type of measures that are complementary and have to be implemented at the same time to address these issues.
Thank you, Mrs. Gallego. Mr. Pedretti. Okay. Then any member from ESN group wishing to take the floor? Yes, please. 1 minute and a half. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to speak in German. Ich möchte den Blick auf den
Well, I want to look at left-wing extremism here, because there are things that are expressed quite openly on the internet. The youth organization of the left-wing party in Germany has an online site which clearly says that fighting the far right is an activity which is something that can be done with violence, because they refer to an organization which was involved in violence in the past in their slogan. They received a prize with 30,000 euros, and we see thus that extremism sometimes, and here left-wing extremism, is sometimes supported, indirectly, by the state. I mean, these are German members of the Bundestag who awarded this prize. And I think this is a situation that can't be tolerated. So my question goes to Mrs. Molas and the Commission is, are you observing these kinds of things? Are you monitoring them? And what can be done against these kinds of things when you have these kinds of cases being supported by official bodies in the European Union? Thank you.
First, Mrs. Molas, and then Ms. Gallego.
Yeah, Dankeschön. Thanks for the question. It's a difficult one. We've seen a lot of the normalization of extremisms across Europe in different governments, different cases. I think the advantage that Europe has is that we're a union of different states, so we can find checks and balances if we look at one another. But it is an issue, and obviously the only solution to this is to have a variety of ideas in Parliament so that you can find balance. But of course, supporting extremism shouldn't be tolerated. That's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, just to complement, this is also worrying, and we see also in reports from Europol that left-wing extremism is also a challenge in some member states, and what we do at European level is to try to put the tools in place regarding legislation, irrespective of the motivation. Europol supporting investigation when requested by national authorities, so fully agree that this is also a challenge to address.
Thank you. Well, now we have ended the first round of political groups, and now I would like to invite the Cult Committee Chair, Mrs. Nella Riel, to take the floor for 2 minutes, and then we will go back to members of the Cult and INCO committees who have requested the floor. Mrs. Riel, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, for giving me the floor. As the Chair, I'm asking a question, of course, on behalf of the Cult Committee. Given the Cult Committee's concern that overbroad definitions of terrorist contents and the imposition of rapid removal deadlines, such as the proposed 1-hour rule, could infringe on freedom of expression and disproportionately affect smaller platforms and often also reflect biases, how can we strike the right balance between protecting children from radicalization online and also upholding fundamental rights, such as the access to information, media pluralism, and also procedural fairness? Should we prioritize strengthening actually media literacy and cooperation with civil society, or rely really basically on content takedown obligations? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Gallego.
Yes, I think they are complementary, and I think with the TCO regulation, we have a definition of what is terrorist content base on the directive on counter-terrorism, and just want to emphasize that there are very strong safeguards in the regulation in terms that the content provider or the platforms can appeal the removal content to the national authorities. There are very user-friendly complaint systems put into place, and at the end of the day, even a judicial authority can intervene and the content can be reinstated. So we were very mindful during the discussions by the co-legislator to put very strong safeguards on the regulation precisely to protect freedom of expression and information. There are exclusions also, for instance, content for research, for educational purposes is not covered. So in that respect, there are these safeguards, and also there are some mitigating measures for the small platforms, because some of these measures can put a lot of burden of them. So we have some measures also to facilitate. They have to be given a 12 hours warning when the first removal order is sent. And we have also funded some projects, the European Commission, to support these smaller platforms that may not have the human resources or technical resources for this. But as you said, also to work on other areas, in particular on critical thinking, media literacy. They are also complementary and they are needed. So it's a question of finding the right balance that I think in the context of the regulation it was, but now the evaluation of the regulation will see also the conclusions that come with.
Mrs. Molas, Mr. Pedretti.
Just quickly as well, Europol, the EU Internet Referral Unit, is performing content moderation through the voluntary mechanism of the referral, and we are always following strict guidelines regarding what is the content that is disseminated by listed or proscribed terrorist groups, that is violent gore content, And we have also strict collaboration with the fundamental rights agencies and also the fundamental rights officer that is based in Europol. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I will give the floor to those members of Calta and INCO who has requested that, starting with Mr. Moreira de Sá. 1 minute. He left. He's not in the room. Then Mrs. Klabak from the CULT Committee.
Thank you very much. I will continue in Croatian.
Yeah.
Moje pitanje zapravo odnosi se...
My question is related to the fact that we have a regulation, but also refers to how to improve the security of children on the internet. Nobody referred to perils that exist for their mental health. You said that we have a targeted person or targeting persons who recruit in different ways, and I may have missed the beginning because I'm sitting on several committees today, but I would like to know which are the most easily recruited groups and how to protect children in the mental, with respect to mental health. I think media played a crucial role here, but we also seem to forget the parents who have a crucial role. We thank you for your legislative work and let us not lose from sight the fact that everything begins in the family. Thank you.
To group the questions and then they will be answered jointly by our speakers. And now Mrs. Henriksson from the INCO committee.
Well, thank you, Chair. I think it's very important that we discuss this matter and that the Commission try to do everything that they can, because we live in a new world where the digital area and the digital space is taking over, and it has a lot of impact on our young people. So I think that all the measures that are possible to take regarding the Digital Service Act, using the tools that we have there, are very important to use. But then we also come to the member states. And I would like to ask you how you look at the situation in the different member states, also regarding to the cooperation between the police authorities. Is there enough done in protecting minors, and is there enough of tools for the police in the different member states to react in time? Can we do more, and what could the Commission do more to prevent the minors? Thank you.
Thank you. And now Mrs. Grossmann from SD. 1 minute, please.
Dankeschön. Ich spreche auf Deutsch. Dankeschön.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your interesting contributions. So I understood as follows: online radicalization has like psychological pointers, and from a societal point of view, we need to look at isolation. And people feel that when they don't belong to society, then this can affect young people when they don't feel that they belong to a group or a specific cohort. So my question for all three of you: could a European-wide campaign be thought about here that might improve this, to try and counteract this, and could we also target could we also target parents as well? Because parents have a very important role as well as teachers. So we could have in this area. And I also have a question from Mr. Pedretti from Europol. We are seeing radicalization on open platforms, and obviously we have the DSA here. We have tools for oversight of these platforms so that these platforms can be moderated. And obviously we're seeing messenger services, and we're seeing a move from the open platforms to closed platforms. Now, we're discussing in Austria a focus on these closed platforms. Now, could we or should we be looking to improve our oversight of these closed platforms? Thank you.
To each of our speakers, in order to react to the questions that have been put to members, starting with Mrs. Gallego.
Thank you, Chair. Maybe to refer to this initiative that we have to counter radicalization, the knowledge hub on prevention of radicalization that we mentioned, because this is the main EU initiative really to act on prevention and precisely some of the issues that have been mentioned, mental health issues, also the role of civil society, alternative narratives. We are trying with the Knowledge Hub to promote this alternative message and to look into what interventions are needed on prevention as closer as possible to the minors to act and prevent that they become radicalized. Just to stress that this is a very useful tool. We have thousands of practitioners around Europe connecting them. They are from social workers, educators, but also law enforcement. So we have to come all together to address this. So this is a bit how the Commission can support on prevention, and including on this raising awareness and giving the practitioners working on prevention the tools to do their work every day.
Thank you, Mrs. Gallego. Mr. Pedretti.
Regarding the first question, I just can say that, as I mentioned in my intervention, the most of the cases involving minors were related to males, but we don't have the full picture. Of course, we are supporting the investigations that are provided by the Member States, and it's important also to notice that, according to some European legislations, some of these minors are not prosecutable, so therefore any investigation is started and the case is not reported to Europol but to the social services. So I'm not in position to provide the exact figures or categories.
Thank you. Mrs. Molas.
Yeah, thanks for the questions. Two of them really stress the role of the family, which is not something that we've talked about so far, but I think it's really important to say that, parents also need education in learning how to understand or flag early signs of radicalization, because often when they realize that harmful has been done or might be done, it's a little late or it's a little too much, and they're scared of reporting their children for their safety. So I think this is back to what's been said earlier, which is that we should take a whole of society approach. Parents need to be involved in what the social services might think it's best to do for a preventative approach, same as schools. Collaboration is key.
Thank you, Ms. Molas. Now that concludes the first panel of this hearing. We do thank you all members of this panel and speakers for their contribution to a better understanding of this phenomenon and also the strategies that have to be put in place to deal with it. Now we have another panel on this issue from more national perspective that we will start immediately. So we will now continue with the second panel, which, as I said, is focused more on the national perspective and the work that is done on the ground. We have two very qualified guests, two very qualified speakers. First, Mr. Edvin Sandström from the Center for Preventing Violent Extremism within the Swedish National Council for Crime Prevention. And we have Professor Bartolomeo Romano, full professor of criminal law at University of Palermo. So welcome to both of you. Thanks for coming. And I would like to start by giving the floor to Professor Romano for, first we will listen to Mr. Sandström for 5 minutes. Floor is yours.
Thank you so much.
Microphone, please. Microphone for the speaker.
Oh, so sorry. Okay. Hi, and thank you, everyone. I represent the Center for Preventing Violent Extremism at the Swedish National Council for Crime Prevention. And our center has been operational since 2018. And we give support to professionals in Sweden working in prevention. And since the beginning from 2018, it was very much focused on more organized groups, as we heard here today as well. But since 2022, I would say, there was a big shift in concerns coming from professionals in school that they were this hybrid of ideologies that they didn't really know how to handle. So from focusing quite much on knowledge and information about how the left and right-wing groups in Sweden were organized, it has become much more on the online activities of youth. So in order to meet this, we have taken and built on already strong initiatives that we have had. Our center is structured on a knowledge hub, which I have been leading since 2022. And we have a mobile support team that is quite important. Even if we come from a national level, we go out to municipalities if they have concerns and don't really know how to handle them. So we can go out there and sit down at the table and give case management with this mobile support team. And additionally, we have established a gaming network in order to provide more information on how about to reduce the risk of online harming, especially connected to gaming and grooming and what we heard about before the gamification, and trying to understand that matter as well. And also in January this year, we launched a testimonial theater, which has been a really good trigger to show how important it is to work with the protective factors, which schools in Sweden, and I mean all over Europe, are great at doing, but try to show also how, not only how the risk factors are important, but also how the prevent factors could also be problematic in the sense that you think that you are already doing what is necessary, but also try to show how in this new landscape, how the recruiters are really smart at using protective factors such as, strong family and strong bound on online gaming and lure you in and groom you to the extent that it's very difficult then for professionals within the schools to really understand and how to really try to tackle this problem. So this is also why it was important for us to try this new model of testimonial theater, where we investigated and also interviewed some of the school shooters in Sweden to actually try to understand how their stories and life stories, how they ended up doing this, and to better protect and build on stronger preventative measures from our groupings. And this is also how we have enabled our mobile support teams, those to go out to the case management. Even though we have pretty good, I would say, materials and support models in this, focusing very much on how you can speak with college about these matters. it's also so important when it comes to the room. You know, when you think about that you might have a terrorist in the class, we often come down there and say, take out the terror of the terrorism, because it's much easier than to understand the preventive cycle already used in most of schools and try to take them back, the professionals, to their normal structures, because this is what we've seen and learned so much in Sweden, that when we speak about radicalization, people very often tend to lose their original structures. So our report is very much focusing on how to support and bring them back to what they do, and then we can do some add-ons in knowledge and that stuff. But their primary preventive work is quite well adapted, even in these matters. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And now the floor goes to Professor Romano. The floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and I thank you in particular for this very important invitation, because it allows me to give my contribution as a professor of criminal law on this important subject. On the question of online radicalization, there's a transnational and international aspect to this, and it involves a vast number of people, and therefore has to be tackled with great concern, because there is also the issue of freedom of thought. And we have to be clear about what we're trying to protect. We're trying to protect very important issues such as beating organised crime. The situation is even more complicated when we have minors involved. Minors deserve the protection of the law. I would like to say at the beginning of all this that if you look at the Italian experience, that we have to make a distinction between the threat of recruiting minors by organised crime and the threat of recruiting minors for terrorist acts. These are two issues, in my view, which have to be kept separate, kept distinct. If we look at organised crime, it's based on recruitment which is not ideological in nature, but rather on economic need and the lack of education and cultural context. Recruiting of minors by organised crime members normally happens in specific areas on the basis of knowledge, local knowledge, and they're not questions of radicalisation. Criminal bands, or the traditional ones in any case, base themselves on very direct interpersonal contexts. And if we can look at a typical example of recruitment, we see that apart from families, the prisons play a role, because they certainly encourage this kind of criminal relationship. On the question now of organised crime, we see that there's a sort of restriction, and we can see this in films, for example, where we have it's very difficult to actually intervene because of these restrictions of personal freedom. So what I would suggest there is to actually, if you like, forbid the dissemination of a certain material among adolescents and young people. I would restrict, in a legislative way, online content of this kind for minors. I think that's a direct action that we can use the online sphere in order to try to limit the amount of, if you like, disciples to this, the new recruits. And in the European context, these two things are treated in a distinct way. Turning now to beating terrorism, combating terrorism, we have a very effective legislation. We have the Special Terrorism Committee in Italy that was set up in 2018, part of the European Strategy 2020-2025 programme fighting terrorism, and report from the European Parliament and Regulation 784, which more recently legislation about these services which emerged in 2022. And of course, particularly important in all this is the contribution of Europol. And I really appreciated what was said by Dr. Pedretti. He has presented us with a very useful analysis. I would simply at this point like to say that from looking at this, 44.6% of people between young people between 6 and 10 consume this kind of material every day, and from 11 to 13 years, we get 92% if we take the 14-18 age group. So they're very, very present on the internet. If you look at these figures, in Italy, we have a criminal legislation for terrorism, 264 articles of our criminal code, which for terrorism, and I'll come back to these later. What can we do in practice? In my view, terrorism has to be combated on the basis of a cultural action. We have to reinforce awareness about radicalization at a European level. And if I could perhaps give some advice in this, I think it would be very useful for the European Union to introduce an obligation for individual member states to carry out cultural and educational campaigns to combat radicalization, de-radicalization, that is information, campaigns, debates in schools, social aid. I think that can be done by the European Union. I think it would be very useful. Thank you.
In the course of the interventions of political groups, we will be able to discuss further on this issue. Now we start with the round of political groups. We have 30 minutes until the vote, so I would invite you to be as precise as possible and to make the most of the 1 minute and a half that has been allocated. We start with EPP, Mrs. Cinici.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would like to thank our guests for this very interesting debate which we're having this morning. It's a very important subject. It involves intervening against radicalization or organized crime against minors. Unfortunately, these minors are the first victims in all this, and so it's very necessary to actually speak on this. And I really appreciated the words of Professor Sandström, or Mr. Sandström, I'm sorry, because radicalization online, which has been discussed extensively in the first part of our meeting, is a phenomenon which is without borders. So my question to you is, not just at local level, at European level, can we somehow reinforce a system which you have described to us today, which you have represented? And to Professor Romano, I also have some questions, because you, Professor, mentioned the recruitment processes of organised crime, in particular vis-à-vis minors. This is, I have experience of this because I worked for many years in an area where there was heavy involvement from the mafia. And we know that there's therefore a need for a different kind of approach here in order to combat radicalization, in particular online. how can we at European level tackle this issue? Within the context of Protect.EU, which involves modernization somehow or updating of the legislation in this regard. Just very briefly, a last point, because Mr. Lopez Aguilar spoke about the recruitment process for these young people. We, in 2017, adopted Directive 800 of 2016 for the protection of minors. So can I ask you, we have this directive, but the implementation in the various member states has been rather varied. So how can we somehow reinforce this and have some kind of proper attention to be paid to the problem of minors? Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Chinichi. I have invited members to be concise in their questions. I invite you to be concise in your answers. I know that some issues are complex, but please try to do your best.
Okay.
Mr. Sandström.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a very good question, and I've been working at the center since, as I told you, 2018, and we learned from other member states that they also have really good models. This is also why I wanted to push our testimonial theater strategy, because what we need to be improving this is to be better to implementing the knowledge we have, right? At least from what's coming in prevention. And on the online specifics, it's very much from the RAN network, previous network, and also now on the new EU hubs. We have work, and this is what we're trying to push, because we know that other European countries also have really good models that, as I tried to tell you, how to speak about the protective factors as well, not only the risk, because then it's easier for us to get the people who really, are work in school and other really important early prevention sites.
Thank you. Professor Romano.
Grazie. Thank you. Well, what I'd like to emphasize is that minors are people whose personality isn't fully developed. So when they get information, it's important to ensure that we take account of a dual approach. Firstly, we need to take a cultural approach, because here a lot of prevention work can be done. We can try and work to try and move them away from some kind of affiliation to terrorism or moving towards any kind of organised crime, which sometimes, depending on where they're born and depending on the family in which they grew up, is something that is kind of part of their lives. But on the other hand, we also need to protect minors, regardless of whether they've committed crimes or not. I mean, we need to be particularly careful here, because the legislation of all countries, as we've heard, is not identical in terms of criminal responsibility, and also when you have ad hoc legislation as well. I mean, for example, I think there should be a minimum age, say 14, for criminal responsibility. We have legislation on that kind of thing in Italy. And Mrs. Chinichi was a prosecutor at the court for minors, so she knows all about this kind of thing. And this is a way of taking more care of minors, I think.
Thank you, Professor Romano. Now S&D. Señor López Aguilar, floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. And again, I thank the panelists. The continuation of this conversation, this session of us this morning of the Libe Committee dealing with understanding child recruitment for criminal purposes. And the whole point of a hearing is not only to get to know, but also to draw lessons as to how to improve the European response, particularly when it comes to lawmaking, which is the main function of this committee of us, first lawmaking committee in the House. So I would raise two questions that are connected with the points I made before, partially unanswered, and the mention that has been made by my colleague Caterina Chinichi precisely on the chances to reduce that impact of child recruitment for criminal purposes. First, any chance to have EU legislation making a real difference as to access of children to media, particularly to algorithms, addictive algorithms which are leaning on violence, any chances actually to forbid indiscriminate access of underage to certain contents in their mobile phones, in the media, algorithms which are addictive to violence, any chances to make a real legislative difference at the European scale of response? Of course, we have put in place a number of pieces of legislation, I'm sure you know about them, but still we're discussing how to discriminate adults from underage when it comes to accessing to certain contents, harmful contents. And second, particularly to Professor Romano, appunto sulle garanzie procedurali.
On procedural guarantees, I mean, I think that's what you were referring to, wasn't it? But there are differences. And regardless of the legislation we implement, there's a variety of responses when it comes to procedural guarantees for minors, depending on the member state you're in. So, Professor, would you say that there's a model that's more effective in that context? So, a model that we can learn from, a model of best practice that other member states can learn from? Thank you.
Thank you. Gracias, señor López Aguilar. Mr. Sandström.
Okay, thank you so much for the question. I mean, I didn't speak too much about that, but as I told you, we have a gaming network, and it's really important for us that we bring people from the industry, and they are, of course, part of the European legislation in that sense, that they, you know, they can help us finding out how we can speak more, you know, in terms of how old one is to play a specific game. But they also have really hard, even from the Swedish side and their colleagues around the world, that there's so many different views here that there's still an industry going on, and they don't really meet us from the perspective side as we really try to push. But this is at least a step from us in Sweden to gather the gaming network, and hopefully that will be, you know, have some result on the European level as well.
Thank you. Professor Romano.
Sì, la sua domanda,
On your first question, well, I think that brings me back to the figures I was mentioning earlier. So 45% of children between 6 and 10 years old have access to the internet on a daily basis. So we have to base what we do on the fact that these minors are, well, more than digital natives. I mean, they have digital skills that we can't even imagine. So just banning things, yes, that is something that is possible. The technical tools are available, but it ends up risking being a fight that's lost from the start, because unfortunately we all know that when there are blocks put on something on the internet, you've always got people who can get through or round them. So as well as that approach, I think we have to work very hard in terms of education and in terms of culture, which is really the only tool that can help minors. Now, on your second question, I would mention the Italian model, not because it's the best possible model available, but because there are a couple of things that are particularly good about it. I mean, I think that minors should always be considered minors, and so there should be a minimum age established for criminal responsibility. Now, not every member state has the same age. It's not in every member state that a minor is not sanctioned, but I do think that minors should be treated differently from adults. And I think it would be useful to have a specific model for procedures in a specific place, as is the case in Italy, because in Italy we have a specific juvenile criminal procedure, which is different from the procedure used for adults. And we also have an ad hoc judicial body, which is the juvenile tribunal. I mean, it's perhaps not an ideal model, but it's nevertheless a good one, I think.
Thank you, Professor Romano. Now the floor goes to PFE, Mrs. Nicola Bartusek.
Thank you very much, Chair. I will continue in Czech. Online radikalizace dětí v Evropě.
Online radicalization, Islamic terrorism is no longer a marginal issue, it's a threat for our safety and safety of future generation. Terrorist organizations, ISIS, Al-Qaeda and online supporters have improved their digital strategies. They use encrypted communication applications, gaming platforms, algorithms, video content in order to indoctrinate children as young as 12. I want to mention a few examples. In Austria, Vienna, 2024, 3 youngsters, 17, 18, 19, were planning a suicide attack against Taylor Swift concert. Their goal was to kill as many people as possible. It was on social networks. Thanks to the police, this was thwarted. In 1921, a dual citizen was radicalized as a result of ISIS propaganda and committed a terrorist attack. In France, Belgium and Germany, a number of youngsters were arrested recently who were planning to attack following indoctrination through encrypted channels. In many cases, those were young immigrants, unaccompanied minors. Still, there are a number of prohibitions, for example, ban on detention of unaccompanied minors. My question is, how can national authorities verify every individual who comes to our territory? And do not the protective clause in the Migration Pact prevent these checks and verifications from taking place? Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Bartusek. Mrs. Sandström.
I'm really sorry to disappoint. It's a quite difficult task, but what I can tell you from the Swedish case at least is that, of course, we have a good collaboration with those actors and authorities dealing with this. So, I mean, we, from our center, focusing on radicalization and extremism, we heighten their knowledge about this and, you know, try to learn from one another. And then it's their, you know, chance to deal with who's coming in and out. But we of course speak with one another, but we don't really deal with that from our center.
Professor Romano.
Io vorrei tornare sulla questione.
Let me go back to the question by saying that today we're focusing on the recruitment of minors to commit terrorist acts. And as I've said, minors should always be considered as such, i.e. people whose personalities are still being developed. But we shouldn't forget that minors don't act on their own. I mean, they're indoctrinated by someone, they're informed by someone, they're equipped by someone else, they're armed by someone else, they're instructed by other people. So we have to be more severe on the adults who are using the minor. For example, in Italian legislation, and other legislation too, there are specific aggravating circumstances envisaged for those who use minors to commit a crime. So I think a recommendation from the EU along these lines could be pretty useful. So striking at the adult who's involved, you can reduce the number of crimes that the minor can commit. So my plea to you would be, let's be careful not to constantly be hitting out at the minor, who is the weakest subject in the framework of complex crime. Let's try and focus on the people who are using, indoctrinating, enlists and arms that minor. Thank you.
Now for ECR, Mrs. Kanko.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, everyone. Thank you for your contribution this morning to this important conversation. Indeed, youth radicalization is accelerating, and the tools to address it are less and less obvious, certainly because we are losing control not only as a society, but also as families. I hear regularly that we need to forbid access to certain social media. I mean, try to do that even with one teenager at home. It's not easy. How can we do that with all teenagers in society? And what guarantee can we have that they don't find other ways that are invisible to even access these tools? Of course, resilience is the best way to counter the radicalization process. But there are a couple of things we can do, and there are parts that are responsibility of this Parliament and the Commission. And we need, of course, to take the money away. I'm glad that Kant was here. We are giving too much money to the wrong organizations that are radicalizing our children, and we saw the report in France about the Muslim Brothers, for example. So now on two questions I have for you, for the professor. You said that there are two things that we need to separate, but during the translation into my language, I didn't catch that. Maybe you can repeat that and elaborate on it. And second, what is the biggest barrier to in your experience in Sweden to achieve change in this area? And do you also see that AI is being used to radicalize children? Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Kanko. Professor Romano, we'll start with you now.
Sì, io mi riferivo al titolo del...
Well, yes, I was referring to the title of our hearing, which links organised crime and terrorism. But the way I see things, these are two things which sometimes have links, but actually are very, very different. Organised crime really is based in certain geographical areas with direct personal links between people. So it doesn't really need the internet. It doesn't really need online radicalization. I mean, it takes place much closer to home, as it were. So I think when you take your important decisions, you should distinguish between the two situations so that you don't provide responses that end up being inadequate for terrorism and useless in terms of fighting organised crime.
Romano, I don't have any member from Renew on my speakers list. If that is not the case...
I can answer the second question. Yeah.
President.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, the biggest challenge for us, since we're dealing with the professionals already working in prevention in such, it's changing their mindset, because they are quite afraid on how to reach out to young people, and specifically on their online activities. So we have a really good information sheet now, and also the information sheet from Europol this year as well. So we have good knowledge, but as I told you before, the problem is to implement it. And this is also why we try to put a lot of effort on this theater, because what we see from it is that even also teachers, they really understand their position in a better way, following, a young man's way into radicalization. So it's a good storytelling piece that heightens the problem, and it has become quite effective. And I didn't tell you, but we will tour this around Sweden for about a year to 200 schools, so there will be a spread of it.
Thank you, Mr. Sandström. Apologies. Now, as I said, I don't see any member of the Renew group. Is there any member of the Renew on our speakers list? Then we go to the group of the Greens. Mrs. Brickmont, floor is yours.
Thank you very much for your interventions, and it shows how important it is to listen to ground experience. I was wondering, Mr. Sandström, whether you already spoke about the European connections you have, but are you, for instance, connected to Madame Molas, who intervened in the first panel, and the radicalization network and knowledge? Because there are many initiatives at EU level and also many initiatives at national level, and that's what is interesting about it, sharing experience and being able to work together. Listening to you, I hear that community work is really important, to work with online, but also in the real life with the children and people as a real access to prevention. So I'm eager to listen to you also because related to what Mr. Romano said on the fact that we should make a separation between organized crime and terrorism, and that the phenomenon are not the same. The way recruitment happens is not the same. We've seen it in Belgium, for instance. Drug trafficking and organized crime are related and recruit children in town in order to use them in their criminal organizations. And there obviously is a lack of prevention, community work, education. Also listening to you, Mr. Romano, shouldn't we consider those children that are being recruited and radicalized online as first and foremost as victims, and that our system considered first that they are victims of a system of manipulation before to being criminalized. Finally, I also have a question to both of you. What would be your recommendations to us, co-legislator? Where do you identify loopholes at EU level to have a real action towards this issue? And also from your field experience, I think European campaign about towards parents, educators, also somehow to take back control, because as parents and being myself a mother, we are not aware of what is happening online, and we have tools to take back control, and I think we have to set rules, basically, to our children and specifically minors online. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Sandström.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, we go to a lot of meetings and we do a lot of information sharing about our models and that. And I mean, that is something also that we learned, that we still, and this is also why many countries, I think, speak out how we have to tailor it to our local situations. Because also in Sweden, I mean, what I speak about, the theater doesn't really, it's difficult on a national level to see it, but it's very interesting to see how it works in some municipalities, and then to see in some where it doesn't work, so we can, tweak it a bit. And this is also, I would say, to answer the whole that models, we have good models that are kind of similar, specifically in Nordic countries, but we need to tailor them a bit since our culture are a bit different, I would say. But they are great work, and we do collaborate with a lot of European actors, yes, and also international, and we learn a great deal from them.
Thank you, Mr. Sandström. Professor Romano.
Grazie.
Thank you. Well, yes. Minors absolutely are first and foremost victims. Obviously, we have to look at what kinds of minors we're talking about. Are we talking about children, teenagers, young adults? I mean, we have to know exactly which age range we're talking about when we talk about minors. I mean, the younger the person is, obviously, the more they should be considered a victim rather than a perpetrator. But as they get older, obviously, there may well be more participation from their side, more involvement. So I think that here we have to be tougher at the European level when it comes to dealing with the adults who recruit, inform and arm minors. So the heavy hand of criminal law should be used vis-à-vis those people. Now, on what else should be done? Well, I think that when it comes to fighting terrorism online, particularly when it relates to minors, I think it could be useful to, at the European level, use entrapment websites, as it were. So websites run by the police with all the appropriate safeguards in place, which can attract those people who want to spread terrorist content online, so that what they do is intercepted before it actually gets to minors. So this could be carried out by individual police forces online, and it could be a kind of preventive activity, so that the recruitment efforts don't reach the minors in question. Thank you.
Member of the group of the left on my speakers list, and I have no ESN member on my speakers list either. So there is a request for Catch the Eye. There will be Mr. Barrot for PFE. Just 1 minute, and then you will answer, and we finish this panel. Monsieur Barrot, 1 minute.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. La logique de...
Thank you, Chairman. Well, this idea of considering minors as victims, this is the idea that exists in Italy and France, and it's been around for decades. But unfortunately, those who are involved in organised crime or terrorism love that system. I mean, they're overjoyed to hear that minors should be considered victims, because the result is that they continue to recruit minors who risk much less than adult perpetrators would. And they know when it comes to the competition between a dealer who is offering a minor 10,000 euros and a social worker is, well, it's a foregone conclusion. Now, we think in France that actually constantly trying to protect minors sends them into crime, because it means that they get recruited. So I really think we should be very careful there. I'd like to hear from you there, because I've heard far too much about minors being victims for my liking. I no longer necessarily think that minors are always victims, and we have to be aware of that nowadays. They're recruited because there are too many people who believe that they should be treated as victims.
From your side, Sandström.
Yeah, okay, very short. Yeah, I mean, it's very problematic, and I mean, I agree with you to some extent, but still, you know, we speak about minors, and especially now in Sweden, we see in 8 years old as well. And I mean, then the school and the social system, which we have, and I mean, a lot of European countries is good, and this is also why we have to tailor our support model to better fit this system. So, I mean, when concerns come into the system, and the handling and the program, they have to be more well fitted to also deal with what you're mentioning, that these are also quite dangerous people, even if they are in the age of 8, you know, the very low age.
Thank you, Mr. Sandström. Professor, very briefly.
Sì, io comprendo perfettamente.
Well, I fully understand your concern, which is one of my concerns too. I would suggest operating in a twofold manner. Firstly, clearly establish what a minor is, because we don't have the same idea of what a minor is exactly. Are we talking about someone who's under 18, under 14, under 8 years old? I mean, we need a clear line on this so that we know exactly who we're talking about when we mean a minor. Is it someone who can take decisions independently or not? Now, secondly, your concern is understandable, and I would actually, though, suggest that there should be greater penalties for those adults who are making use of the minor, because they're doing that in full awareness that the minor is going to face a less harsh punishment. So I think we should say the younger the minor is, the harsher the penalty should be for the adult who's made use of the minor. I think that's a way of frightening those people who want to use minors.
Now we conclude. That concludes this very important item on our agenda, and I would like to thank all those who have contributed to this session with their expertise and their viewpoint. We have now, I think, more aware, and we have a better understanding of how serious this phenomenon is, and the need to find ways and strategies to protect our children from harmful influence. So now we have a vote coming up, and we thank our speakers again. Thank you.